Today's daf is daf Samach Daled B'Siyata D'Shmaya. And we'll start from the top of the Yomit. Rava Omar, the Gemara is looking for an answer to the question, why was there a need for a pasuk to teach me the psul of Mechutz's man with regard to the Sarah Mishtaleh? And Rava offers his answer. He says that the reason we need this pasuk is for the following scenario. And when we talk about Mechusas Man, again, let's review. We're talking about the animal within the first 8 days of its birth. Kigon shahayalo chola b'soch beiso. On Yoma Kippurim, there was someone who was deathly ill. His life was in jeopardy. And therefore, we need to shecht an animal in order to feed him. And Pikuach Nefesh overrides Yom Kippur. V'shachat imo b'Yom Kippurim. The animal that they shechted, which was available to them, was the mother of the Sarah Mishtaleh. And that's what they shechted on Yom Kippurim. Now, the Torah says, Lo sishchatu oso v'espino lo sishchatu b'yom echad. So there's an isolav of oso v'espino, and once they shechted the mother of the Sarah Mishtaleh, then it's impossible to shecht the ben, because halachically that would entail a violation of an Isra. So after they did the Hagrola on the two Seirim, and now we have a Sarah La Zazel, and it's Bechusas Man, and the reason why it's Bechusas Man is because of the Isra of Oso V'es Bino. And we would have said that since at the moment of the Hagrola, the Sawyer was not Mechusas Man, because they had not shechted the mother of the Sawyer, it's not possible afterwards as a Sarah Mishtalech. It's not called Mechusas Man. So if you have a Sarah Mishtalech that's less than 8 days old, for that I don't need a pasuk. That is called Mechusas Man, and that psul would apply to Sarah Mishtalech as it applies to the Sar Pnimi, the Sar Lashem. But in a case where the reason why this Sarah Mishtalech is Mechusas Man is because we cannot shech the Sawyer because of the Avera that would be incurred of Oso V'es Bino. In such a case, I don't know that Mechusas Man, it's not Begufo Shel Sawyer, it would passel the Sawyer. So for that, I need a pasuk. The Gemara asks, V'chi Gavna. So let's just make sure we all have the same place. We are now on the second line from the top of Samach Daled towards the end of that line. V'chi Gavna, in this kind of situation of misaso berisa kevarim b'dachil letzuk, that the way we destroy this animal, this Sarah Shtalech, we don't shecht it, we push it off a high precipice. Mi asir, would there be any violation of Otso Vespino? After all, when the Torah says Otso Vespino, it says Lo Sichretu, Omar Achmonu. The Torah says you're not allowed to shecht both the mother and the offspring on the same day. For Halav Shchiti, but here he pushes the Sarah Mishtalech off the cliff. It's not Shchita. And the Gemara answers, Ha'amri B'mar Rava, we have a tradition from Eretz Yisrael, the Chiyaso Zui Shchitaso, the Yosel Itzuk, when we press the animal and push it over the precipice, that is considered Shchita. That is the Shchita of the Sayer HaMishtalech. And therefore, once we shechted the mother of the Sarah Mishtalech, we cannot push the Sarah Mishtalech off the precipice, because that is tantamount to shchit, then it would be a violation of Otso V'es Bino. Now let's go back to a very important point in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if they did a Hagrola and afterwards one of the two Seirim died, then they have to bring an entire new pair and do the Hagrola on the second pair. And he should make the following declaration. Imshel Shem Mes Desha Olav Hagora L'Shem Yiskayim Tachta. V'imshel Azazel Mes Desha Olav Hagora L'Azazel Yiskayim Tachta. So he does a second Hagrola, and he says the following. If the Sa'ir that died from the first Zug was the Mishtalech, then now the Mishtalech that I'm designating through the second Hagrola will replace the Sa'ir on the first Zug. And if the Lashem Sa'ir was the one that died, then the Lashem in the second Gorol will replace the Lashem in the first Gorol. And now the Gemara, now let's just add one more point. The Mishnah says that the other Sa'ir, because now you've got a second Sa'ir, which is a duplicate of the one that's alive, because you did a second Hagrola to replace the first Hagrola, but one of the two Seirim from the first Hagrola is still alive and well. And the Mishnah says, since only one of these two can be brought, the other one is Yira Achi Yistayev. We send it out to the grazing area until it gets a mum, a blemish, and then we do a Maisa Pidyon. And the domim of the Pidyon goes to the dom. Now we have a machlokas amoraim between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan about the following question. The Mishnah doesn't say explicitly which Sa'ir is Yira Achi Yistayev. Right, we now have two Se'irim of the same sort. One from the first Gorol, one from the second. The one from the first Gorol that's still alive is still alive. So which of the two Se'irim, the first Gorol or the second Gorol, shall we use for the Avodah? Omar Rav, Sheni Shebezug HaRishon. The surviving living Sa'ir from the first Hagrola. Yikrav, that should be brought Lashem. And the second Sa'ir, Hasheni Shebezug HaSheni, Yireh Achi Yistayev. So again, you have two Se'irim. Let's give the example that they're both Lashem. You have the surviving Sa'ir from the first Hagrola, first Zivu, and now the replacement Lashem, Sa'ir Lashem from the second Hagrola. The second one is Yira Achi Yistayev. We want to bring the first one, the one that survives the first Hagrola. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, he disagrees. Sheni Shebezug HaRishon, Yira. He says that the surviving Sa'ir from the first Hagrola, that's the one that should be sent out to the pasture. But Hasheni Shebezug HaSheni Yikare, it's Tafka, the second Hagrola that now replaces the first Hagrola. Now that Sa'ir that replaces the Sa'ir HaChai from the first Hagrola, that Sa'ir, which is called Sheni Shebezug HaSheni, that is the one that will be brought as the Sa'ir. The Gemara analyzes this machlokas via soda. Rav Sover Bali Chaim Einam Nidachin. Rav Sover that as long as you have a live animal, and on a temporary basis there was an impossibility of bringing it on the Mizbeach, but now things have changed, and we're back to square one, and now the circumstances lend themselves. The makriv, that first carbon, that's what we're going to do. There's no such thing as dichui. We don't say that just because at one moment in time it would have been impossible to be makriv the carbon, therefore it's forever excluded, which is going to be the Shita Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Sovar Bali Chaim Nidachim, meaning even though the animal is still alive, once it became disqualified, it's possible, then it always remains possible, even if the siba, the cause of the psul is no longer in existence. It doesn't go back to its hechsher. It was nidche, and it's no longer usable. And the chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan is that even though it's a live animal, and right now we have a problem, but let's just remove that problem, and then we should be able to bring it. That's Rav Shita. Rabbi Yochanan says no. There's halach of dichui, and dichui applies even to a live animal. My time of the Rav, what led Rav to the conclusion that as long as the animal's alive, there's no dichui? The yolif mimechutzar tzman. Let's take the case of an animal that's less than 8 days old. At this point, it's disqualified. That's called mechusas man. After its 8th day birthday, after 8 days since birth, we can be makrid on the karma. That's true for every single zevach on the mizbeach. But yet, it was temporarily, for the 8 days of its birth, excluded. It was disqualified. It's mechusas man. And yet, as soon as we pass that problem, we overcome it, we remove the mechusas man, we're makriv on the karma. During its first 8 days, it's not royal akrava, but kihader michzi. Once we reach the 8th day, we are now going to call it it's royal akrava. Chaper Dami will consider it a kosher carbon. I mean, that's every single case. And yet it was dachui. Is Achinami here too, any balchai that was nidche, like for example, this sawyer, right? From the beginning, it was roy, but then its partner died, and now it is excluded. Lo shna, once we could remove that problem, and we supplied another partner by doing the second agrola, then the sawyer from the first, we call it the Sheni Barishon, that will be brought on the Mizbeach. Or says, no. That can't be the basis for Rav. Me dummy. There's no comparison between Mechusas Man and the Dichui of a Sarah Mishtalech when its partner died. Hasam, in the case of Mechusas Man, Lo et Chazi Klal. It's not that it was Dachui. Dachui means that you have something that could be brought on the Mizbeach, but then an occurrence happened and it becomes excluded and disqualified. But not so in the case of an animal that's less than 8 days. It was never roy in order to activate the principle of dichud. But hacha, here in the case of the sawyer, it was certainly roy before its partner died. And nira v'nitcha. Nira means it was suitable for Mizbeach. Then it became excluded because of the death of its partner. And perhaps Rabbi Yochanan's right that Bali Chaim nidachim. You can't prove anything from Mechusas Man because Mechusas Man was never right to be nidcha. Elo, I knew time, but now the right. The Gemara gives an alternative explanation for Rav. Yolif mi balmum over. There are 2 types of psul, of a blemish in an animal as far as Mizbeach is concerned. One's called a mum kavua. It's a change in the physiological structure of the animal that will not be reversed. And then you have a mum over, which is only a temporary mum, and with the passage of time, it'll be healed, and the blemish will be removed. And the halacha is that bal mum over, lav afagav de lo chazi hashta, ki hadar michzi shaperdam. When the mum passes away, and the animal goes back to its original healthy status, it is kosher l'mizbeach. Says Rav, wait a minute. At one moment in time, you couldn't bring it on the mizbeach. Even in the case of a mum over, we cannot bring the animal on the mizbeach, so it was dachur. And if it was rejected from the mizbeach, what's going to help when the mum is over, when the mum actually heals itself? It's a baal chai nidche. So we must derive the conclusion that there's no din of dichui in a baal chai. It's hachinami lo shna here too. In the case of the Shnei Seirim, let's consider the death of the partner Sayer as a kind of a mum over, which means that now we could replace the deceased Sa'ir with a second Agrola, and the first Sa'ir becomes kosher. Rabbi Yochanan says that Balichaim Nidachim, and once it's Dichu, it cannot be Chosev V'nira, even if we remove the Siba of the Dichu. So why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan open his mind to accept the analogy of the derivation of Rav from Baal Mum Over? And Rabbi Yochanan says, Mi'et Rachmana, in the parsha of Baal Mum, which is in Vayikra, Perek Chav Beis, Pasuk Chav Hey. So 1 second, I skipped a little bit. V'hasam minolam. How do we know that a Baal Mum is over? It's kosher l'karban, and it's not nidchel yolam. V'chsiv, because the pasuk says in the parsha Baal Mum, Vayikra Chav Beis, Mashchasam bahem mum bam lo yerotzu. Mum bam. Bam means that presently there's a blemish. The lo yerotzu, and therefore it's excluded from the mizbeach. Ha avar mum, muman yerotzu. So that's the drasha from the word bam. Rabbi Yochanan is going to say, mi'et rachmana bahem. In other words, not only does it say the word bum in this pasuk, it also says bahem. And bahem is a mute. Hem, meaning bali mum. Hudeka avar muman yeratzu. Hakol dechuyim hol v'nidchu nidchu. Rabbi Yochanan has a mute from the word bahem to teach you that Baal Mum Over is the exception to the rule with regard to Dichui. And the Torah is saying that Bam V'lo Misha Avar, that's a unique halacha with regard to the Psul of Baal Mum, but any other Dichui based on this mute is Hol V'nidchu Nidchu. For Rav, why doesn't Rav derive this mute of Bahem? Hahu Bahem Be'enayu, to teach me that Bahem, when is a carbon that has a mum, pasul mizbeach, that's only Bahem Be'enayu. When I can identify this carbon as a Balmum. But if I cannot identify it because it got mixed in a taroves, so you have a mixture and you don't know where in this mixture there's a balmum. Like, for example, you have a carbon ola, and the carbon ola has various segments and limbs that have to be brought on the mizbeach. And that carbon ola, which was a balmum, got mixed up with another carbon ola and its limbs, which was not a balmum, was a tamim. And according to this drasha of Bahem, which is teaching me that Bahem lo mirtzu, with a balmum there's no ritzui carbon, but in a tarovas there is ritzui carbon. This now we learned in the Mishnah in Zvachim Daf Ayin Zayin. A varim, so we're talking about the limbs of a carbon ola, tmimim, and nisarvu bevarim bali mumin. So you have now two sets of limbs that got mixed up. We can't tell which is which. We can identify which are the limbs of a balmum and which of the tamim. In such a case, Rabbi Eliezer Omer im karev harosh echad mehem yakrivu es kol haroshim kulam. It's what we call tliya. If he went ahead and let's say he took the head of the ola, which again ola is kulei kol, so everything has to be burnt on it, and he burnt it on the mizbeach, then all the other roshim in the taroves are mutal gabi mizbeach. You will go ahead and you will be maktir all of them. Yakrivu kol haroshim kulam, and alternatively krav, let's say the feet of the Ola Shalechamim of one of this mixture was brought on the Mizbeach, Yakrivu Kol HaKarayim Kula. We bring all the legs of all that was mixed together, and that's called Tliya. We're going to assume that the rush that he was makriv, or the kirayim that he was makriv, was that of the balmum, and therefore the balance of the varim in this mixture can be brought on the mizbech, and not from the balmum. Now, again, what are the percentage statistically that the one that he was makriv was really the balmum? It's probably 50% in the best scenario, but it's a lot less in other scenarios if you have a mixture of many, many different karbanos. But the answer is that this halach of tliya, lekula, only applies and always applies in a case of a derabanan. And on a deraisa level, there is no isa deraisa to be makriv that segment of the animal, that limb of the animal that was mixed up. So you have a mixture with balmum together with other tmimim, and the Torah says that that's allowed because bahem means be'enaihu, as we say. Chacham omrim afilu karvu kulam chutz me'echad mehem yetze lebeis hasreifa. The Chacham give you the exact polar opposite, that even if you are makriv all the ligaments, all the parts of the avarim of this mixture, -1, and certainly percentage-wise, we can now assume that it was the balmum that was already nikrav, and the one that I have left, Torah, is not the balmum. Nevertheless, Yetzer Beis HaSreifa, we're afraid that maybe this is the one, this last one, that's the balmum, that came from the balmum. And apparently the Chacham hold that when it comes to Evrei balmum, then on a doraisa level, we cannot be matered b'tarovas. So therefore, even if he was makriv one of them, we have a suffix doraisa with regard to the other evarim, and we have to be makriv. In any event, Rav holds that from the pasuk Bohem, we're going to learn that only an aver of a balmum bifnei atmo is excluded from the mizbech as a korban, but nisarvu harei heim re'uyim lekorban. The idach. What about Rabbi Yochanan? He used the word bahem to exclude a case other than Bali Chayim. Other than Bali Mum, as far as the halach of whole v'nidche nidche. Has he going to derive the conclusion, which underlies the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, to the effect that Bali Mumim b'tarovos are mutarim la'krava? Now the Gemara could have answered that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Chachamim against Rabbi Eliezer, but the Gemara prefers to see if they can come up with an answer that would even jive with Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara answers, Nafkale mi bum bahem. When the Torah says ki mashchasam bahem mum bum, we've got a double drasha in the word bahem. It could have said bum, right? Mishchasam bum, and it says bahem. So we have another redundancy here, and that's going to teach me that bali mumim are ksherim b'tarovos ve'idach. And Rav, who needed the word bahem to darshan that bali mumim b'tarovos are mutter, is what does he do with the word bum bahem? It's a double drasha. Bum bahem lo darish. That's the way the Torah writes. It's not something that lends itself to a drasha. Now we came to the conclusion that according to Rav, we're going to be makriv the Sayer Lashem Hasheni Barishon. And that's because Ein Balichaim Nidach. So the Gemara asks, Ula Rav Nehi Nami de Balichaim Ein Nidachim. Iboy Hai Nakriv, Iboy Hai Nakriv. Why don't we give him a choice? Flip a coin if he wants to be makriv, let's say the Sayer Lashem from the first Hagrola, fine. From the second Hagrola, that's also acceptable. Why does Rav push the envelope that we should be makriv this soir hasheni sheberishon. Omar Rava, Rav Sovala ki Rabbi Yossi, the mitzvah berishon. We're going to derive a conclusion from a statement of Rabbi Yossi in a different context that he would insist, as Rav insists, that it's the soyer from the first hagrola that should be makriv on the mizbeh. And now the Gemara analyzes this. Hey, Rabbi Yossi, where is the statement of Rabbi Yossi from which you derive the conclusion of mitzvah berishon? If you're going to stretch your arm out to Masechet Shkolim, Rabbi Yossi de Kupos, which means that they collected the machzis hashekel during 3 different time periods in the course of the year, and they put them into 3 different kupos. Tisnan, and the Mishnah says in the 3rd parak of Shkolim, shalosh kupos shel shalosh sa'in. In the Mikdash, there were 3 kupos. Each one would hold a volume of shalosh sa'in. Shebehen tarminis halishka. Then they would take these monies from the lishka to purchase karbanos tzibur. So they would fill up these kupos, these 3 kupos, during 3 different periods of the year, before Pesach, before Atzeres, and before Sukkot. Well, this is in the Mishnah in Shkolim. V'kasav aleim, and on each one of these kupos, one of the following 3 letters was inscribed: Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. V'sanya, the Brisa analyzes, Omer Rabbi Yossi, Lama kasav aleim Aleph, Beis, Gimel. Why is it so important that we know which of these 3 kupos was the Erev Pesach kupa, which was the Erev Shavuos Sukkah kupa, and which was the Erev Sukkot kupa? And the answer is Leda Ezemem Nitrama Rishon Lahavi Emena Rishon Jemitzvah Rishon. That when we go to buy the karbanos tzibur from the Trumas Halishka, we should make sure that the first round of karbanos tzibur we buy from that kupa that has an aleph on it, which was Rishon because that kupa was collected Erev Pesach. Gemara says Dilma Shaini Hasa. We could certainly differentiate between Rabbi Yossi and Kupos and our discussion about the Sair, because in the case Shani Hasam, in the case of Kupos, mitzvah sheberishon, according to Rabbi Yossi, is mishum de beidna de itchazi kamaisa lo itchazi basraisa. When they had collected the matzis hashekel erev Pesach for the first of the 3 kupos, there was no possibility of purchasing a carbon tzibur at that time from the kupos that came into the second, from the shkolim that came into the second kupa. That's impossible. So therefore, there was a period of time, we'll call it time T1, in which only the Rishon was roy for a carbon tzibur. However, in the case of Sawyer, that's not true. So Rabbi Yossi will say we're going to use the first kupa in the case of shalosh kupos because in the case of Sawyer, when its partner died, it wasn't roy at that point. Why not? There's something that underlies this Gemara that's not spelled out. And the one who spells it out is none other than Rashi. And Rashi tells us that although they did the Hagrola number 1, and they designated one Soil Hashem, but nevertheless, at that point, it wasn't Royal Mizbeach. Why? Because we need what's called the Matan Domim of the Paro Shel Kohen Gadol, the Parachatas of the Kohen Gadol. Up until that point, the Sawyer is not Roy Limizbeach Lakrava. When, at what point does it become Roy? Well, its partner died. They were Magril, a second Agrola, and then they did the Matan Domim of the Par. At that point, both Seirim are equally Roy. Can't derive anything from Rabbi Yossi. Ella Rabbi Yossi the Pesach, the Sanya Mafresh Pischo vi Ovad. He was Mafresh Aseh on Erev Pesach Yudal Benisa. and it wasn't near a carbon because it was before chatzos. And now the carbon jumps the coop and it's lost. Hifish acher tachtov. He designates a second set to replace the first. V'acher nimta rishon, and he finds the first one. Or a shneim omdim, both of them now are roy l'shchita as a korban pesach on Yidal b'nitzan after chatzos. Ezim and shiyirtze yikrav derich come say, take your choice, flip a coin, whichever the two lambs, either from the first or from the second, are roy l'mizbeach. Or Rabbi Yossi Omer mitzvah b'rishon. Let's assume that both lambs are the same size, the same beauty, the same quality. Then you should take the rishon, the original one that he was makir. And that's the way you should fulfill the mitzvah of korban pesach. And now we turn to Samach Daled Amid Beis. The only exception is if the second replacement lamb was of an inferior quality, then we have halach and kach, and we always bring the muvchar, and therefore you vienna. But it seems clear from Rabbi Yossi that chatchila mitzvah berishon, and that's what Rav is saying here. Rav is standing on the shoulders of Rabbi Yossi of Pesach.